She saw him once, a tall black man, calmly unlocking the door to a house that should be empty. Her heart pounded, her fingers already dialing 911. She knew something was wrong. And 15 minutes later, when the police were already surrounding his house, Brandon Reyes looked right at her and said words that made her world collapse in an instant. At the end of the story, leave your opinion below, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll continue. Jennifer Adams loved her neighborhood. It was her pride. Prestigious houses with manicured lawns, neighborhood picnics, mutual control. It all created the order she was used to. She knew everyone here. Knew who left when, who came back when, who owned which car. And so, when a dark SUV pulled up in front of a house on the corner that she remembered had been vacant for the past few months, her inner alarm bell went off. A tall black man stepped out of the car. Jennifer stood on the porch of her house, watching him blankly. He was dressed neatly, in dark jeans and a light-colored shirt. In his hands, he held a bunch of keys. She frowned. Keys? That could mean he had access to the house. Or something worse. The man went to the door, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked, and he stepped inside. She knew this house was empty. She had talked to the real estate agent just a couple weeks ago. The sale was still pending. Or was it? Her fingers were already sliding across the phone screen, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? Came a polite female voice on the line. Hi, this is Jennifer Adams. I live at 24 River Road. I'm seeing some suspicious activity. Some man has entered a house a couple houses down from mine. As far as I know, it's vacant. Did you see him break down the door? No, but he used a key. It's weird because, well, this house, I'm sure, is still listed for sale. You want us to send officers to check it out? Yes, please. I'm just concerned. Our neighborhood shouldn't have strangers just walking into houses. The operator promised to send out a patrol, and Jennifer felt satisfied. She had done what she had to do. She was maintaining security. 10 minutes later, a police car rolled up the street with sirens blaring, but no flashing lights on. 2 officers got out, heading toward the house. One of them knocked on the door. Jennifer, unable to resist, stepped closer, staying a little farther away. The door opened. The same man appeared on the threshold. His face expressed slight surprise, but not fear. He calmly introduced himself and took his papers out of his pocket. The policeman studied them. Jennifer tensed. She expected anything: excuses, confusion, lies. But she hadn't expected what happened next. It's all right, ma'am. One of the officers turned to her. This house belongs to Mr. Reyes now. He's the rightful owner. Jennifer was confused. What? Her voice shook. But I thought. The man, Brandon, if the officer's words were to be believed, looked directly at her. Did you think I couldn't own this house? He asked in an even voice. The question caught her off guard. No, I just dashed, she faltered. The cops, satisfied that there was nothing more for them to do, wished her a good day and left. Brandon stood on the doorstep of his new house, looking at her. Then he shook his head and closed the door, without another word. The feeling she was experiencing was not familiar to her. Was it shame? No. She just wanted to make sure her neighborhood remained safe. Didn't she? The incident with the police had kept Jennifer on edge. She tried to convince herself that she just wanted to protect the neighborhood, but her own thoughts were working against her. Why did this particular man make her suspicious? Why had she immediately decided he couldn't be the rightful owner? She continued to watch the house, unconsciously now. Every time she passed it, her gaze lingered on the windows, on the car in the yard, on the figure of Brandon, either unloading things or talking on the phone on the porch. Everything seemed perfectly normal, which is why, when an anonymous post appeared in the local neighborhood chat group that someone who may be unreliable has moved into our neighborhood, Jennifer felt both relief and fear. She wasn't the only one who felt something. The next day, she decided to look into it. She had connections in the Homeowners Association, HOA, and went to one of her friends, Cynthia, a woman in her 50s who knew everything and about everyone. Jen, have you heard yet? Cynthia looked at her meaningfully as they sat in the cozy kitchen drinking tea. About what exactly? Jennifer feigned disinterest. Cynthia leaned forward. About him. The new owner. Jennifer didn't answer, letting her friend speak further. They say he moved here for a reason. Some say he's been watching the house since before he bought it. Jennifer frowned. How do you know? Cynthia turned on her laptop with a smile and opened a folder of surveillance footage. The cameras installed throughout the neighborhood recorded every step. Check this out. Footage flashed on the screen. An empty house, with a dark SUV occasionally appearing in front of it. The dates on the video indicated that this was before the official transaction. What does that prove? Jennifer asked cautiously. Cynthia shrugged. Who knows? But you were right to call the police. Somebody's got to keep order. But there was no confidence in her voice. Jennifer could see that even Cynthia didn't fully believe her own words. Suddenly it hit her. What if he was watching the house because he knew he was being watched? Cynthia frowned. What do you mean? The cameras dash, Jennifer swallowed. If we have those tapes, then maybe he has his own. What if he knows we've been watching this house long before he moved in? Cynthia thought for a moment. You think he's gathering dirt on us? And then the unexpected happened. Jennifer's phone vibrated. A message from a neighbor. Have you seen this video? It's about you. She opened the link and immediately realized things were out of control. Brandon's face appeared on the screen. He was standing on the porch of his house, and behind him a screen of footage flickered. Surveillance footage. Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Reyes, and I'm a new resident of this neighborhood. But some people here seem to think I'm not entitled to it. Then came the footage. Video from a camera on a neighboring house. A dark SUV parked in front of an empty house. Video from another angle. Strangers, including Jennifer, walk by and look suspiciously in the direction of the house. Video from the night the police arrived. Jennifer talking to the officers, her face and expression of displeasure when she learns that Brandon is the rightful owner. Brandon's voice sounded calm but firm. I moved here with my family, hoping to find peace and safety. But before I even moved in, someone had already decided I was a threat. Someone was already watching me. Now ask yourself why. Jennifer knew there was no avoiding this conversation. After Brandon's video went viral and sparked a wave of discussion, her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Some sent her angry texts. Some just watched in silence. But worst of all was the silence of her neighbors. She saw the looks in their eyes, saw the conversations go quiet when she appeared, the way people looked away when she passed by. She was no longer the Jennifer Adams who kept order. Now she was Jennifer, the woman who had become the face of racial prejudice. She wasn't going to put up with it. When she'd seen Brandon in his yard that evening, watering his lawn, her legs had carried her to him. Her breath hitched with a mixture of anger and despair. You did it on purpose. Brandon turned his head, meeting her gaze. There was no gloating in his eyes. There wasn't even anger, just weariness. Which is what? You made me look like a monster. You embarrassed me in front of my neighbors. You have no idea what's going on in my chats now, how people look at me. He sighed, set the hose aside, and wiped his hands on his pants. Do you have any idea how they looked at me when I moved here? Brandon took a step forward, but not threateningly, just close enough for her to feel the weight of his words. I bought this house with my own money. Worked for it for years. I moved here with my wife and son to give them a better future. But what did I get? Cameras, surveillance. The police called the first day. And why? Because someone thought I looked suspicious. Jennifer opened her mouth, but found no words. You didn't even ask. You didn't try to find out. You just jumped to conclusions. Just like everyone else. It's not. Her voice trembled. I was worried about safety. It had nothing to do with. She faltered. Brandon didn't even blink. With what, Jennifer? Race? Brandon didn't push, didn't yell. His voice was steady, but it was the deep, seething pain that couldn't be drowned out. Can you say that out loud? Brandon looked toward her house, then back at her. How many times have you watched me while I was out of sight? How many times have you checked to see if this house is really empty? Jennifer flashed with shame. She thought her observations had been unnoticed. But now she realized he'd known all along. You know what really amazes me? He continued, exhaling. You're not the only one. This whole neighborhood works by the same rules. People think they're keeping each other safe, but really they're just isolating those who don't fit in. He paused, as if giving her time to digest what he had said. And now that you've been rejected, you're suddenly uncomfortable. Those words hit her the hardest. She turned away, looking at her house. Just a few days ago, she had felt like the mistress of the neighborhood. Now she was shunned. I didn't mean to dash, she whispered. Brandon nodded. But you did. And with those words, he turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing there amidst the crumbling remains of her reputation. Jennifer couldn't let him walk away, not with that cold, judgmental stare that followed her like a shadow. Hold on. Brandon stopped, but didn't turn around. What do you want, Jennifer? His voice was tired, as if this conversation was just another repetition of what he had already said hundreds of times. Her words were stuck in her throat. Brandon turned around, folded his arms across his chest, and looked at her expectantly. Go ahead. I'm listening. But what could she say? That she meant no harm? That she was wrong? That her actions were motivated by a concern for safety? It all sounded false, like the excuses of someone trying to avoid responsibility. She saw it in his eyes. I didn't know you bought this house. Brandon hummed sarcastically. But you knew the house was empty, right? And when you saw me, you assumed I was a thief. You didn't even think there was another explanation. That's not true. Not like this. He squinted. Would you call the police if it were a white man in my place? His words pierced her like a knife. It has nothing to do with race. She blurted out, but her voice sounded uncertain. Did you? Then explain to me why you called the police, without even trying to find out who I was. Why didn't you come up to me? Why didn't you ask? Why did you just assume I was a threat? She opened her mouth, but found no answer. Brandon leaned a little closer, his eyes sparkling with restrained emotion. You know what the worst part is? You don't even realize how deep it is in you. You didn't think you were doing anything wrong, because people like you think it's normal. You believe you have the right to decide who is allowed to be here and who is not. You call it a safety concern, but it's really just fear. And that fear makes people like me strangers in my own homes. She swallowed hard. I am not like that. Brandon grinned. That's exactly who you are, Jennifer. You're the woman who thinks she's not racist, but calls the police when she sees a black man in a nice neighborhood. You're the woman who thinks she has the power to decide who's appropriate and who's not. I just wanted to protect our neighborhood. From who? His voice rose sharply, and she flinched. From me? From a man who'd just moved into his own house. Who were you defending yourself from, Jennifer? I didn't know. You didn't want to know. You wanted me to be guilty. Because if I turned out to be the perpetrator, your prejudice would be confirmed. You could say, see, I was right, and feel like a hero. But I didn't turn out to be what you made me out to be in your head. So now you feel like a victim? The words hit her like a hammer. I'm not a victim. No, you're the culprit. Brandon straightened up and took a deep breath, as if trying to calm his anger. But you know what the worst part is? She looked up. Just because I'm not surprised. That phrase finished her off. He turned around and headed for the door, but before he entered the house, he tossed it over his shoulder. Welcome to the real world, Jennifer. Now you know what it's like to be unwanted. And closed the door. A few days passed, but for Jennifer, the days dragged on for an agonizingly long time, like an endless nightmare she couldn't get out of. The neighborhood that had always been her territory now looked at her differently. People she'd known for years, who used to greet her with a smile on the street, now looked away. At the store, when she reached for a carton of milk, the neighbors standing next to her seemed to casually step aside. In group chats, the discussions went on without her. Even Cynthia, her friend and ally, now responded in short phrases, without her usual friendly warmth. She was no longer a part of this society. And the worst part? She understood why. She herself had built this world where people lived in the illusion of safety, dividing each other along invisible lines. She was the one who kept that order. She believed she was doing the right thing. But now that she was on the other side of the system, she saw its true face. Unwanted. One morning, as she went out to get the mail, she spotted Brandon. He was standing outside his house, talking to someone on the phone. His voice was calm, confident. And then she realized nothing had changed for him. Yes, the first days after the scandal were not easy, but he did not become an outcast. People came up to him, greeted him, asked him how things were going. They did not shun him as they shunned her now. She would want to justify herself. She would have liked to say that what she had done was not malicious, that she had simply made a mistake. But now she realized that people don't care about excuses. They care about how you behaved in the moment of truth. And she behaved the way she did. Suddenly Brandon turned around and met her gaze. Jennifer froze. She was expecting judgment and scorn. But his eyes were different. He didn't look at her as an enemy. There was something heavier in that look, a realization. He knew what she was going through. Knew she'd realized her guilt. But he wasn't going to do anything about it. He didn't try to finish her off. He didn't try to forgive her. He just saw her as she really was. She was the first to look away. Her world had changed. And now she knew she would never be the same again. Conclusion. We often think we are good people until our actions put us in front of the truth. But the truth cannot be ignored. When bias becomes the norm, we don't realize how it controls us. But when it comes at a price, it's too late to pretend you didn't know. Jennifer realized her mistake. But it wasn't enough. Because the consequences of her actions have already changed everything.